First, we are glad to hear that your test results came back negative.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear the same thing. Although what was surprising to me is the doctor then said, but you still have to stay in quarantine for 14 days. I said, wait, I tested negative. No, that's a good start, but we have to have you in quarantine because you can develop the virus down the road, even though you test negative now. So I guess I got to stay around home for a while.
Well, then in that case, congrats on the temporary good news. Hopefully it becomes permanent good news over the next few days. We still have people join the call. We said we would start at 10. We're 2 minutes to 10. So are you okay waiting a couple more minutes for a few more people to join?
You bet. That's fine.
Perfect. Currently, we're up to 73 participants, and we will have, as I'm scanning the list of participants and people who I recognize, we have city leaders, county leaders from Garden City to Santa Clara, Taylorsville, Midvale, the great Adam Gardner, who you're familiar with, and thank you, Adam, for all of your behind-the-scenes work. We have Vineyard, West Point, Blanding, Springdale, Naples, West Bountiful, Tooele. So you've got a nice cross-section of your constituents from around the state. For those who are just jumping on, we'll start right at 10 o'clock. Thank you for joining us. The senator's ready to rock and roll, and we'll start in just a few seconds. All right, it is 10 o'clock. We have 87 on currently. I expect more to join us. I want to thank everybody for taking time this morning, but particularly thank Senator Mitt Romney for joining us again to discuss what's been happening in Washington, D.C. For those who just joined the call, Senator Romney did test negative for coronavirus, but is still in quarantine here in Utah, but has had his finger on the pulse of everything that's happening in D.C. And just like last week, Senator, we have you on a historic day to talk about what is happening in Congress that affects cities and counties. So with that, thank you for the time, and I'll turn it over to you to give us an update on what's happening in D.C. And then, so everyone is aware, the Association of Counties and the League of Cities and Towns both submitted questions to Senator Romney through his staff. Brandy Grace, are you on the call from the Association of Counties? I know she was planning to be on the call, and it's possible that she's just still muted. But Brandy and I have been coordinating this with Senator Romney and his staff. So thank you, Senator. The time is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Cameron. And good to be with you from across the state. Obviously, these are very challenging times, and appreciate the work that's being done here. Congratulations also to the governor and Natalie Gochner and all the people on the governor's team that have put together a plan for the state of Utah. It is a model, not just for other states, but for the nation. I wish we had a plan as good as that at the federal level, but I don't think we do. I want to direct you for questions and updates to two websites. One is one that relates to the federal government, and that is at romney.senate.gov. So romney.senate.gov. We're keeping that up to date on all the latest information with regards to small business, cities and towns, schools, and so forth. And the other, of course, is the one here in the state of Utah, which you can reach by coronavirus.utah.gov. Both those sites are available and are kept up to date. Thanks also to my team, Kelsey Berg and Adam Gardner, for the work that they lead here in our state. You heard that last night about 2 a.m. that Republicans and Democrats agreed on a final version of the bill. It is a step forward, but it's full of all sorts of strange landmines, some that the Democrats put in place, some that I'm sure Republicans in our haste to try and get this through have made little errors putting together. There are going to be some unintended consequences we're not going to like, but overall, the provisions are positive. You know what the main provisions are, and I know I'll focus on cities and towns in just a moment, but the main provisions are first, getting help to individuals and families, anyone earning $75,000 a year and less, or a household $150,000 a year and less, will get a check of $1,200 per adult, plus $500 per child. That will also be true for people who are Social Security recipients and veterans benefit recipients. These checks will probably come out in the next 2 to 3 weeks was the best estimate from the Treasury Secretary. They're trying to move this as quickly as they possibly can. In addition, we have increased the amount that goes into unemployment insurance. So people's unemployment insurance check will be boosted for the next 4 months by $600 a week. So a pretty dramatic increase in the amount of unemployment insurance payments that people will receive. So this is obviously intended to help people meet their obligations during this difficult time. There's a provision for small business, and I know that many of you are going to get calls from small businesses in your community. The main provisions are these, which is an employer with less than 500 employees is able to go to the bank where you get SBA loans and receive a loan guaranteed by the federal government. This loan is intended to be forgiven at the end of the period. So in many respects, it feels like a grant. In order to get the loan, you will have to show that your business has been substantially negatively affected by the coronavirus crisis. In addition, you have to be able to show that your level of employment remains the same as it was before the crisis. And many people have already laid people off. They will be given the opportunity, if they would like, to rehire them so they can show this stable level of employment. And then they can receive a loan of up to 2.5 months of the payroll of their company during the time when they were in full operation. So 2.5 months worth of payroll they can get as a loan. The top loan amount is $10 million. Obviously, not many businesses will qualify for something of that scale. And then at the end of this crisis, perhaps at the end of the year, the government will look back at these loans and see whether, in fact, you maintained employment and only use the money to pay for rent, utilities, debt obligations you may have, and of course, the salaries and wages of your employees. So that's the small business portion. Let me turn to large businesses. I know that won't affect a lot in the state, but there's some $500 billion that's been put aside for the banks to be able to give loans to larger businesses. These loans, however, will be made at market rates and are intended to be repaid in full. They are not grants in any way, shape, or form. Your interest, of course, and I'm sorry for getting to this last because this is your area of greatest interest, and that relates to what's happening for cities and towns. $150 billion is being appropriated for cities, towns, and states. And what will happen is each state will get its pro rata share based upon its population. So assuming we have about 1% of the nation's population, we'll get about $1.5 billion. That will go to the state. The state, in turn, is to distribute this to the cities and towns and counties within its borders. So this will be up to our state to decide how to distribute this money. However, the money is only to be used for coronavirus purposes. So costs directly associated with the coronavirus. So it's not just a slush fund to be used by the state for its purposes and for cities and towns to use it for their various purposes, but instead it's to be used to reimburse for costs associated with the COVID crisis. So even though the state has not determined how they're going to be distributing these funds, if I had a controller that was hanging around the office today, I might ask them to begin to calculate or to gather at least what the specific costs are, what the incremental costs are associated with this crisis so that you might be able to qualify for these funds. How the state of Utah will decide to distribute them, I don't know. They might say we're going to do this pro rata based on population. They may instead say, no, there's going to be a certain minimum amount to each city or town. They could distribute it to counties and let them further distribute it. Or they may insist on seeing precisely what the costs are associated with responding to the crisis and distributing it that way. So that's going to be decided by the state, and that's something the federal government will be telling states how to do. There's one provision I'll mention to you that you may have heard about, and I want to make sure there's not confusion on this. The Democrats insisted that in the case of cities of over 500,000 in population, and we have no city at that level, in states, however, that have cities with over 500,000 population, instead of the state receiving the money and then sending it to the city is going to receive the money directly. And I don't know why the Democrats insisted on that, but it means that the big cities will be getting their checks directly and they won't have to wait to see what the state decides to send to them. So we won't be the beneficiaries of that, but they will not get a larger share. They'll get the same portion pro rata that they would have gotten in the regular method that's being applied for with everybody else. Finally, let me turn to some questions which have been submitted. I've got it on the phone here, so I'm going to do my best to respond to these. One question is, and this comes from Shannon Ellsworth, who's a Provo City Council member. She said, what's the census going to do? Because we're going to have people away from Provo, obviously, immediately. And as a result, what's going to happen to our census count? The Census Bureau understands the problem that we're dealing with and is going to move their census taking back until mid-August. Now, I know that doesn't help a lot for university and college students being counted, but they are going to push it back that far. They are required constitutionally to get the job done by the end of the year. And so they're trying to hire more people, the Census Bureau is, to be able to gather information. But obviously this presents a real problem for the census. My own reaction is that we in Congress ought to insist that we push the census back an entire year. But that may not be possible within the Constitution and the law. But I would like to push it back even further and perhaps see if there's no way to insist that the Census Bureau, with regards to colleges or college towns and university towns, that they push the date back even further. Next question comes from Mallory Matsuda of Helper City. She's a council member there. Her question is, are there federal efforts to make sure our healthcare workers have the protective equipment they need? Are you aware of any Utah-based companies that can produce the equipment? The answer is that the Utah COVID Task Force is urging businesses that have this equipment to provide it to the state, and it will be distributed through by the state through the Salt Palace Convention Center. And so to get more information about what's available, again, go to coronavirus.utah.gov if you'd like to donate or if you'd like to find out what is available. I'd also note that FEMA is coordinating with states to get supplies as quickly as they possibly can. And then some regional hospitals, like Moab Regional Hospital, are asking community members to step up and to help produce masks where possible. Finally, I'd note that in the stimulus bill, there are hundreds of millions of dollars that are being appropriated to the production of these products. And the president has also declared a emergency that allows him to direct companies to manufacture more protective equipment, which is being done. Next question, Mayor Dan Knopf of Brighton, asked a question about whether the federal government could provide funding to insurers to require that they cover losses for business interruption insurance from the pandemic. That's an important point, but instead that has not been done in the bill. Instead, the Small Business Administration program I described is what's being used. I think it's about a $350 billion program, again, enabling small businesses, when I say small, 500 employees and less, to go to their bank that issues SBA loans. To get an SBA loan, the amount being 2.5 times a monthly payroll amount. And the funds have to be used for rent, for salaries, wages, and utilities. And if they are used for that purpose, that loan will be forgiven at the end of the period. And now a question from the Utah Association of Counties. It says the second stimulus bill, the Families First Corona Response Act, creates paid sick leave and family medical leave requirements for all state and local agency employees. But you know, it treats private companies and public entities differently. Private companies don't have to pay sick leave until they get relief from the Treasury, but there's no provision for public employees. But the purpose for that elimination or that matter is that with regards to the $200 billion that are going, $150 billion that are going to states, that money can be used to provide for the sick leave of individuals and therefore compensating them through that state benefit. I hope I made that clear. I was kind of tongue-tied on that, but did my best. So Cameron, let me turn back to you and see if there's anything you'd like to inquire about. I can tell you that it's a huge bill. It's over 1,000 pages. My team and Senator Lee's team they're all working very hard to go through it line by line. We see a number of things that we think, boy, that was a mistake. I wish they wouldn't have done that. I'll give you an example. The unemployment benefit in Utah is going to be raised each week by $600. In some cases, people are going to make more money in unemployment benefits than they made in their job. And that's going to encourage people not to go back to work, but to stay on unemployment because they're getting this extra money. This provision of an extra $600 per week in addition to the normal unemployment benefit is going to last for 4 months. So obviously that has an unfortunate incentive. The reason for that, I spoke with the Treasury Secretary just a few moments ago. We had a conference call this morning. The reason for that was most state systems can't deal with irregular numbers, meaning a percentage of people's pay and the like. They can only deal with a flat sum in a timely manner. So they said they lit upon a $600 number, and that's the number that's going to be provided in every state. And I can tell you that in some states, the unemployment benefits are going to be increased by such a large amount that many people will ask to be fired so they can get the benefits because they're much higher pay than they're currently getting. There are other matters like that that are frustrating. A number of items that, of course, the Democrats tried to put in. They did get some things in that we're not happy about, but had to agree to in order to get the package passed and get help out to families across the nation. I can tell you that I will be voting for the legislation. I support the legislation, but I don't like it in total. I shouldn't say in total. In total, I do like it, but every single aspect, no. I would change a few things if I could, but the nature of politics in a bipartisan setting is you have to give some things to the other side. And so with that, Cameron, I'll turn back to you for any questions you might have, or sign off as you'd like.
I do have a couple of just clarifying questions, and so thank you very much for that insight. You mentioned a moment ago about the $150 billion that will go to states and then through states to local governments. You mentioned that could be a reimbursement for COVID-related costs, including potentially unemployment and FMLA mandates that local governments currently are required to comply with. I just want to make sure that the intent of the legislation, to be clear for the cities and counties that are listening, is that we don't benefit from the same payroll tax benefit that's extended to the private sector. In order to have that same type of tax relief, that would need to be part of the reimbursement package for that $150 billion that comes to the state and through the state to local governments. Is that accurate?
That is my understanding, Cameron, but I have to tell you that that provision of the bill has not been distributed yet, so they may have made a change, but at last reading, that was the indication that various county and city and town and state governments would be able to consider the sick leave provisions as part of their coronavirus costs, and therefore could be reimbursed if the state chooses to do so in that way. Again, the state of Utah is going to have to decide exactly which payments to make to which cities and towns and on what basis, but I presume those would be qualifying expenses.
Senator, do you know if the bill has certain deadlines for when the state would need to determine how to spend that $150 billion or the pro rata portion of that $150 billion?
No, I do not believe it has any deadline. We don't actually know when someone's giving me a call here, so turn that off. We don't know precisely when the funds will be distributed and how quickly that will be able to be done. So there's no deadline on getting that information into the feds.
Thank you, Senator. You also mentioned, and Adam Gardner just put the link up in the chat room, that romney.senate.gov/coronavirus will be the one-stop shop for everything related to the bill, because you mentioned there are 1,000 pages of bills, and those of us who work in legislation here at the state level know what a arduous task it is to review legislation, summarize it, analyze it, and then make it user-friendly for people. So thank you to your staff for getting that out. we've received a lot of questions too around housing assistance, whether or not there would be any sort of moratorium around rents or mortgage. Is anything like that contemplated in the bill, or is the bill more, here's additional resources for a family and you spend it as you see fit?
Yeah, more the latter, which is by and large, the provision is getting money to families, one, through the $1,200 check, secondly, through a very substantial increase in unemployment insurance, and three, loans to small businesses and large businesses, loans to small businesses to be forgiven, large businesses not forgiven. But in that case, in both cases of large and small businesses, to be able to qualify for the loans, the businesses have to retain their employees. They have to keep paying them. So the idea here is it's the same cost to the government, whether they're on unemployment insurance or whether they're being paid by a company. We'd rather have them be paid by a company so that when the economy opens up again, people are ready to go to work, and we can boost our economic vitality at a much more rapid basis. So yeah, we're getting money to individuals so they will be able to pay their rent. Now, there are a couple things that the Democrats insisted on putting in, and I couldn't get a final word from the Treasury Secretary this morning. I asked him twice, and he didn't have a definitive answer. But the Democrats insisted that there be a provision saying that people cannot be evicted during this period of time. And the question was, well, is that everybody in all of the apartments and rental properties across the country, in which case people are going to have an incentive to simply stop paying their rent? And his answer back was, no, this is for Section 8 housing and for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac backed properties. So exactly who that applies to is not quite certain, but there is a question mark then around whether there will be some provision to protect people from being evicted as a result of this crisis. Clearly, my hope is that with the money that's going out to individuals, people will still be able to pay their rent and will pay their rent, and there will not be a disincentive to pay on properties. Otherwise, we could have a lot of properties get in financial distress. Cameron, I can't hear you anymore. You got to press your unmute.
Yep, you got me, Senator. I had muted myself. And then Brandy Grace from UAC may have an additional question or two. You've explained what the impact is on small businesses and individuals, on big businesses and local governments. What about not-for-profits?
Not-for-profits qualify under the small business provisions. So not-for-profits, as long as they're under 500 employees, will be able to approach banks that are SBA banks with the same requests and will be treated the same way. So they could use the funding for paying salaries, rent, utilities. At the end of the period, end of the year, those loans will be forgiven if they use the monies for that purpose and those purposes alone. I note that very pleased that was part of the legislation, but also the gig economy workers, sole proprietorships, individuals who are perhaps driving from Uber, they will all be able to qualify for these payments coming from, or these loans coming from banks guaranteed by the SBA. One thing I know this is not terribly relevant to everybody on the call, but one thing I should underscore, I mentioned that there's some $500 billion that's going to loan capacity to large businesses. And I note that this money goes into the banking system. And so given the leverage the banks are able to employ, that actually translates into $4 trillion of additional loan capacity of our commercial banks to corporations of all sizes. And these loans will be given to large companies, but they will be given at market rates and they will be expected to be repaid. They will not be forgiven as the small business loans will be forgiven.
No, thank you, Senator. I have one follow-up question just about the timing then of all of these loans. You mentioned that after the bill becomes law, the Treasury Department will be working on the individual checks and hope that those checks will go out in the next 2 to 3 weeks. You mentioned that there wasn't a time frame specifically in place for the money that will go to local governments through the state. Are there deadlines around that 2.5 month period and the other loans, or is it a rolling period of time since we don't know how long this curve will extend?
My understanding is that people will be able to obtain loans up through the end of June, so one doesn't have to get in line at the very front. It will probably take at least 2 to 3 weeks for the SBA to get regulations out to banks, so they'll know what they're looking for when they see whether entities qualify for a loan. And I know one other thing, and that is there are only 800 SBA lending banks in the country. The Treasury is going to do its very best to expand that. We have more than 2,000 banks that we'd like to have be able to make these loans. So they're going to try and expand this capacity to more than just the 800 SBA banks that are currently across the country.
Excellent. And then the last question that just came in is, will the checks that individuals receive be taxable income or not?
Well, that's a darn good question. But my recollection is, well, I know what our bill, the original bill said no, they were not taxable, and I presume that has been preserved. But I didn't ask that on the call this morning, so I can't be 100% sure. And just a little more clarification on that. It's you get a check of $1,200 if you earn $75,000 a year or less, and then but that doesn't cut to zero if you earn $76,000. Actually, it tapers down until you get to $99,000 of income, and at $100,000, it goes to zero. So there's a tapering down for those between $75,000 and $99,000, and of course you can double that for household amounts. But I don't think that's taxable, but I'm not 100% sure.
Terrific. Well, Senator, those are all the questions that I had. Brandy Grace, are there any questions that you have from the counties that you would like to bring up?
Just one follow-up, Senator. Has there been any further discussion about existing SBA loans? Delay of payment opportunity or anything along those lines for those businesses that already have an existing loan?
I'm going to have to direct you to our website, again, romney.senate.gov. My understanding is that there will be forbearance on those loans. I would also note that the two big provisions that are going to help cash flow for small business and large business is that taxes owed to the government are going to be pushed back 180 days. And so people don't need to get taxes in on April 15th. They can push it back 180 days beyond that. So we won't be sending checks into the government, but how that relates to payroll taxes, I'm not 100% sure. I think it's different between income tax and payroll tax, and what happens on existing SBA loans, I'm just not sure. We had a discussion about that, about pushing back those payments. My expectation is they will be pushed back, but that's probably going to be a piece of information you're going to have to get from my website probably later today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To that end, Senator, I wanted to reassure everyone on the call that even though we're chatting with you weekly, we are in daily communication with your staff. So as questions come up over the next few days, please make sure you contact us, and we will be in touch with the Senator's staff as well as the staff from the other members of the delegation. Senator, is there anything else that you would like to share with the nearly 200 city and county officials you have on the call before we set you loose?
Well, I just want to say thank you for the work you're doing. I've said this before, but we all consider people who are working in healthcare as essential workers, but we all know first responders are also essential workers. And I would note that those people in city and county and town government are also essential, perhaps in a different respect, but are essential to the functioning of our country and our communities. And I appreciate the fact that you're continuing to work during this period. I'd also note that we're fortunate as a state that we have not seen the rampant increase in COVID-19 cases that we've seen in places like Louisiana and New York. And social distancing remains the best weapon we have to try and keep the infection rate down. Young people think that they're immune. They're not. We're seeing in the statistics coming from New York that about half the people in the New York hospitals that are infected with COVID are under 50 years of age. Now, they're less likely to die than the older people are, but they're still going to the hospital and needing to get care and be put in oxygen and in some cases in the ICU. And if our ICUs become overwhelmed, they're going to die as well. So this is a time when the social distancing remains really important, and particularly for those that are most susceptible to this disease. And that's those of us that are older and those that have a compromised health condition. So take extra care, extra precaution, keep safe. We love you, and we want to make sure our state stays healthy and strong.
Senator Romney.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Senator. We hope that your quarantine is successful, and we appreciate your advocacy on behalf of all of us and the residents of the state of Utah. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll be in touch with your office in the days to come. In the meantime, league staff will stay on the call for a few minutes if people have additional questions, either about the federal legislation or what's happening at the state. So, Senator, thank you. We'll let you get back to work, and then we as staff will stay on the call for a few more minutes. So with that being said, if you have any questions, let's do this. You should be able to type a question into the chat box, and then we can respond, recognizing that some of you may be on the phone. If you are on the phone, Nick, I guess as I answer the chat box questions, you can think through how you want to handle those who are on the phone. If you want them to raise their hand or unmute themselves, and see if we can manage the chaos. So first question, Cheryl Bowers, how much was the total amount allocated for loans for small businesses under 500 employees? So I was frantically taking notes, and we have resources from the National League of Cities. So if my notes are correct, the amount for the loan, the maximum amount is $10 million, but the loan is up to 2.5 times your payroll, your monthly payroll. So essentially 2.5 months of payroll, and then that money can be used for payroll, rent, and other expenses. So Cheryl, keep in mind, if the bill came out at 2 in the morning last night, and so if we can't answer the specific questions about the federal bill, we'll make sure that every question that comes in the chat box will get to Adam Gardner and other members of the delegation. So when can small businesses begin to apply for those forgivable loans? My understanding is it'll take 2 to 3 weeks to get all the regulations in place, and then the money would be available. Whether or not the applications start immediately or then is up in the air. So we'll make sure that question gets passed along. Let's see, Mayor Smith, if an employee quit their job because they can make more money on unemployment, will they qualify under this package? I think that's an interesting question. The senator touched on the potential perverse incentive within the bill. So I think we have to get back to on that one, Mayor Smith. Mayor Reese, let's see, follow-up questions. Yeah, so Mayor Reese, you're hitting on the $1 million question here about the impact on cities, because there is reimbursement costs, or there are reimbursement costs, but then there are other costs that cities will face, and those costs include what you've described, which is the canceling of events for revenue. In fact, you mentioned recreation centers, golf courses for the League of Cities and Towns. It's our mid-year conference. But more importantly is the expected dip in sales tax revenue and other revenue because of, at the very least, this short-term contraction in the economy. That's something that we are actively working on. We had a call with the City Managers Association last week, and we are going to be putting together a strategy for how to help cities through this period of time. The amount of money that the state will now receive is all of 8 hours old, and so we will be following up with state leaders to start to put together a plan of how that money can be spent and what would qualify as a reimbursement. So stay tuned. I think you're asking the very questions that we've been asking all morning about how this money will actually flow. Keith asked when and where will this audio be available and posted. We will, once this finishes up, we will download it and upload it onto the league website at ulct.org. UAC may also put it on their website. At ulct.org, we have a landing page with all of the coronavirus resources that we've been collecting, and all of the coronavirus resources that we've been distributing. Rachel in Moab, will school districts have a separate allocation of relief from the state, or will they be included in the local government portion? That is an excellent question that we will need to find out. I do not have an answer to that. Let's see, Camp Martinez, oh, well, you're welcome for the update. And Susan posted about the video. Peter from the Utah Foundation, what are the biggest data info needs that local government is facing right now? Peter, the answer is trying to understand the fiscal impact of, at the very least, the short-term contraction in the economy and potentially the longer-term, dare we say, recession. In fact, Carrie Malkovich has a similar question about how does this affect city budgeting process? If the tax state is changed, what does that, what does that mean? So Carrie, the tax state would apply the income tax, so it would have an impact on the state. For us, we've been in touch with a few local finance directors who've asked that same question, and we had that question prepared for the lieutenant governor yesterday. We just didn't get to it, and that is the timing around the city budget process. You have to have your tentative budgets in place in May to be approved in June, which means all of the budget work you've done up until March is now somewhat up in the air because of the tumultuous month we've had and likely the tumultuous weeks and months to come. So we've started an internal dialogue around whether or not we should ask for the state to delay or modify some of those budgeting timeframes. Don't have an answer or a plan yet on that front. Right now, we're trying to ask the right questions and figure out what a potential plan would be. Again, we've been working closely with the City Management Association to try to get a handle on this. We are going to be putting together a survey in the next few days with the City Management Association for cities across the state so that we can get a better handle on the fiscal impact of the last few weeks. I am scanning to see if I missed any other questions. As I scan, Nick, did you figure out a way for people on the phone to ask any questions?
So phone users can unmute themselves by entering *6, and they can raise their hand by entering *9. There's also the option for me to unmute everyone and then have everyone self-mute, but that could be somewhat chaotic.
Let's try the first. So will you give those instructions one more time?
So for phone users, you can hit *6 to unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can hit *9 and that will raise your hand so that I can hopefully go in and unmute you.